Imagine the sticky heat of a Midwestern summer evening, the kind that clings to your skin like a second layer. Now, picture two young sisters, wide-eyed with excitement, stepping into the glowing chaos of a county fair, unaware that this night would shatter their world and haunt an entire community for decades. This is a story of Emma and Lucy Hartwell, a tale of innocence lost, secrets buried, and a relentless pursuit of truth that refused to die. The summer of 1995 hung heavy over Millbrook County, Indiana, like a wool blanket soaked in humidity. The annual county fair had rolled into town with its usual fanfare, the Ferris wheel creaking against the twilight sky, the smell of funnel cake and corn dogs mixing with diesel fumes from the generators. For 12-year-old Emma Hartwell and her 8-year-old sister Lucy, it was a highlight of their summer, a chance to escape the suffocating routine of their small farming community where everyone knew everyone else's business, and secrets were currency traded in whispered conversations at the post office. The girls had begged their mother, Janet, for weeks to let them go alone this year. Emma was practically a teenager. She'd argued, responsible enough to watch over Lucy. Their father, Tom, had been hesitant, but Janet saw the longing in Emma's eyes, that universal desire for independence that marked the transition from childhood to adolescence. Besides, what could happen at the county fair? Half the town would be there, watchful eyes everywhere. Before we continue with this haunting tale that would change Millbrook County forever, I'd love for you to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. These stories of the unexplained deserve to be heard. Also, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Your support means everything as we uncover these mysteries together. Janet handed Emma a $20 bill that Tuesday evening, July 18, 1995, along with strict instructions. Stay together, don't talk to strangers, and be at the main gate by 9 o'clock sharp when Tom would pick them up. Emma nodded solemnly, her responsibility weighing on her thin shoulders like an adult coat that didn't quite fit. Lucy bounced excitedly beside her, her blonde pigtails dancing as she clutched a small camera their grandmother had given her for her birthday. One of those disposable cameras that promised 24 shots of summer memories. The fair was in full swing when they arrived at 6:30. The golden hour painted everything in warm, nostalgic hues. Local teenagers worked the games, their practice carnival barker calls echoing across the dusty grounds. The sisters made their way through the crowd, Lucy snapping photos with careful deliberation. She'd been warned that 24 pictures had to last the entire evening. They rode the tilt-a-whirl until Lucy's stomach churned, shared a bag of cotton candy that turned their fingers sticky and pink, and Emma won a small stuffed elephant at the ring toss that Lucy immediately claimed as her own. At 7:45, Emma checked her Timex watch, a confirmation gift from the year before. They still had over an hour, plenty of time for one more ride, or maybe some kettle corn. That's when they encountered him, a man in his 30s with kind eyes and a gentle smile, wearing a volunteer badge that identified him as helping with the 4-H livestock exhibition. He struck up a conversation about Lucy's camera, mentioning that he was a photographer himself and knew some great spots around the fairgrounds for pictures. He seemed harmless enough, familiar in the way that small-town adults often did to children. Probably someone's father or uncle, definitely someone who belonged. His name was David Kellner, though the girls wouldn't learn this until much later, when investigators would piece together the fragments of that terrible night. To Emma and Lucy, he was simply a nice man who offered to show them where the best view of the fair could be found, just beyond the livestock barns where the lights created a magical backdrop. Emma hesitated, her mother's warnings echoing in her mind, but Lucy was already excited about the photo opportunity, and the man seemed genuinely interested in helping her take better pictures. The area behind the barns was quieter, away from the main crowds, but not completely isolated. A few other fairgoers wandered nearby, and the sound of the midway carried on the evening breeze. David pointed out different angles for Lucy's photographs, patiently explaining about lighting and composition in terms an 8-year-old could understand. Emma relaxed slightly, watching her little sister beam with pride as she carefully framed each shot. This was exactly the kind of memory she'd hoped they'd make. Lucy, happy and confident, having an adventure they'd talk about for years. It was Lucy who first noticed that they'd wandered farther from the main fair than she'd realized. The light seemed dimmer here, the sounds more distant. She tugged on Emma's sleeve, whispering that maybe they should head back. Emma checked her watch again. 8:15, they still had time, but Lucy was right. They had drifted away from the safety of the crowd. She thanked David for his help and took Lucy's hand, ready to guide her back toward the bright lights and familiar sounds of the Midway. That's when David's demeanor changed. The kind smile faltered, replaced by something urgent and desperate. He told them about a shortcut back to the main gate, a path that would get them there faster than retracing their steps through the crowded Midway. When Emma politely declined, saying they knew their way back, his voice took on an edge of insistence. He moved to block their path, no longer the helpful volunteer, but something else entirely. Emma's instincts screamed danger, and she pulled Lucy closer, backing away from the man who had seemed so trustworthy just moments before. The next few minutes would haunt investigators for decades. According to witness statements that wouldn't emerge until years later, there was a commotion near the livestock barns around 8:20 that evening. A woman walking her dog heard what sounded like children calling out, but when she investigated, she found nothing unusual. A teenage couple making out behind the 4-H building reported seeing a man hurrying toward the parking area with what looked like 2 children, but they were too focused on each other and too embarrassed to come forward immediately. By 9 o'clock, Tom Hartwell was waiting at the main gate as promised, scanning the crowds for his daughter's familiar figures. 9:15 came and went. By 9:30, he was walking to the fairgrounds, calling their names, checking every ride and game booth. At 10 o'clock, he found the fair manager and demanded they make an announcement over the loudspeaker. The cheerful carnival music stopped, replaced by a crackling voice asking Emma and Lucy Hartwell to come to the main gate where their father was waiting. But the girls never came. As the fair began to wind down and the crowds thinned, Tom's concern escalated to full panic. He called the sheriff's office from the payphone near the ticket booth, his voice shaking as he tried to explain that his daughters were missing. Within an hour, the fairgrounds were crawling with deputies and volunteers, flashlights cutting through the darkness as they searched every trailer, every booth, every possible hiding place where 2 frightened children might be waiting. The initial investigation focused on the possibility that the girls had simply wandered off and gotten lost, or perhaps decided to explore beyond the fair boundaries. Sheriff Robert Hayes, a 20-year veteran of rural law enforcement, had seen similar situations before. Children who lost track of time or misunderstood meeting arrangements. But as the hours turned into days with no sign of Emma and Lucy, the reality became impossible to ignore. This wasn't a case of childhood mischief gone wrong. Something terrible had happened to the Hartwell sisters. The search expanded beyond the fairgrounds to include the surrounding countryside. Volunteers from neighboring counties joined local residents in combing through cornfields, checking abandoned barns, and dragging ponds. The local newspaper, the Millbrook County Gazette, ran daily updates on the front page, keeping the story alive in the community's consciousness. Flyers with the girls' school photos appeared on every telephone pole and store window within a 50-mile radius. Janet Hartwell barely left her kitchen table during those first weeks, chain-smoking Virginia Slims and jumping at every phone ring, certain that this call would be the one bringing news of her daughters. Tom threw himself into the search with desperate energy, driving back roads until his pickup truck's odometer looked like a slot machine. He organized search parties, distributed flyers, and followed up on every tip that came into the sheriff's office, no matter how far-fetched or seemingly impossible. The investigation revealed troubling gaps in the fair's volunteer screening process. David Kellner, the man who had been helping with the 4-H exhibition, turned out to be a drifter who had talked his way into a volunteer position without any background check. His real name was David Kellner, but he'd used various aliases in different towns across the Midwest. More disturbing was the discovery that he had a criminal record, including charges for child endangerment in Ohio, though those charges had been dropped due to lack of evidence. By the time investigators identified Kellner as a person of interest, he had vanished as completely as the Hartwell sisters. His last known address was a rooming house in Indianapolis where the landlord said he'd packed up and left without notice sometime around July 20th, just 2 days after the girls disappeared. His vehicle, a beat-up blue Ford van with Iowa plates, was found abandoned 3 weeks later in a truck stop outside of Kansas City, wiped clean of fingerprints and containing no trace evidence that could link it to the missing children. The months that followed were a blur of false leads and dashed hopes. Psychics called the sheriff's office, claiming to have visions of the girls. Well-meaning neighbors reported sightings at shopping malls and gas stations hundreds of miles away, all of which turned out to be other children who simply bore a passing resemblance to Emma and Lucy. The FBI was called in after 6 months, their behavioral analysts creating a profile of a likely suspect and expanding the search to a national level. But even federal resources couldn't crack the case that had stumped local law enforcement. As the first anniversary of the disappearance approached, the community of Millbrook County was forced to confront a terrible reality. Emma and Lucy Hartwell were probably never coming home. Memorial services were held. Scholarship funds were established in their names, and life slowly began to resume its normal rhythm, though the shadow of that July evening would forever hang over the county fair. The annual event continued, but it was never quite the same. Parents held their children's hands a little tighter. Volunteers underwent extensive background checks, and a memorial garden was planted near the main gate with 2 small benches facing each other, as if the sisters were still there, still together. Years passed with no new developments in the case. Sheriff Hayes retired, replaced by younger officers who inherited thick case files and cold leads. Janet Hartwell moved to her sister's house in Kentucky, unable to bear living in the same place where she'd sent her daughters off to what should have been a magical evening. Tom stayed in Millbrook County, becoming something of a local fixture as he continued to chase down tips and maintain hope long after most others had given up. He aged visibly in those years, his hair going gray and his shoulders stooping under the weight of unanswered questions. The case officially went cold in 2001, though it was never closed. New detectives would occasionally review the files, hoping that fresh eyes might spot something their predecessors had missed. But the evidence remained frustratingly sparse. The girls had simply vanished, leaving behind only questions and the devastating silence of a family torn apart by circumstances they couldn't control or understand. In 2015, 20 years after the disappearance, the local television station ran a special report on the case, interviewing family members and investigators in hopes of generating new leads. The story aired on a Tuesday night, and by Thursday morning, the sheriff's office had received over 100 phone calls. Most were from people who remembered the case and wanted to offer condolences or share theories. But buried among the well-meaning messages was one call that would reignite the investigation in ways no one could have imagined. The caller identified herself as Margaret Willis, now 78 years old and living in a retirement community outside of Phoenix, Arizona. In 1995, she had been working as a cleaning lady at the Millbrook County Fairgrounds, helping to maintain the restrooms and common areas during the event. She'd never spoken to investigators at the time because she was in the country illegally, terrified that any contact with law enforcement would result in deportation. But now, decades later, and with her citizenship secured, she felt compelled to share what she had witnessed that night. Margaret remembered seeing 2 little girls with a man near the livestock barns around 8:30 on July 18, 1995. What stuck in her memory wasn't just the sight of them together, but the fact that one of the girls, the younger one, was taking pictures with a small camera. She thought it was sweet at the time, a father helping his daughters capture memories of their fair experience. But when she heard the news reports about the missing Hartwell sisters, she realized she might have been one of the last people to see them alive. More importantly, Margaret remembered something else. As she was emptying trash cans near the parking area later that night, she found a disposable camera lying on the ground near, where several cars and trucks were parked. She turned it into the lost and found booth, assuming some child had dropped it accidentally. When no one claimed it after the fair ended, the camera was packed away with other miscellaneous items in the storage building behind the fire station. Detective Amanda Cross, who had recently been assigned to review cold cases from Millbrook County, felt her pulse quicken as she listened to Margaret's story. A disposable camera from the night of the disappearance, potentially containing the last photographs taken by one of the missing girls, had been sitting in a storage building for 20 years. If the camera was Lucy's, if those 24 exposures had captured anything from that terrible night, it could be the break investigators had been waiting for. The storage building behind the Millbrook County Fire Station was a testament the small-town pack rat mentality. Decades worth of fair equipment, holiday decorations, and miscellaneous items were stacked floor to ceiling in dusty chaos. Detective Cross spent an entire Saturday digging through boxes labeled with years and events, searching for anything from July 1995. Finally, in a cardboard box marked Fair 1995 Lost and Found, she discovered a small plastic bag containing a yellow disposable camera. Its cheerful Kodak branding faded but still legible. The camera was rushed to the state crime lab where technicians carefully extracted the film, using procedures designed to maximize the chances of recovering usable images from decades-old film stock. The process took 3 weeks, each day an eternity for Detective Cross, and the few surviving family members who dared to hope that answers might finally emerge in the darkness that swallowed Emma and Lucy Hartwell. When the developed photographs were finally ready, Detective Cross spread them out on her desk with hands that trembled slightly. 24 images, most of them exactly what you'd expect from an 8-year-old's disposable camera. Blurry shot of rides, candid photos of Emma making silly faces, a few pictures of the games and food stands. Lucy had been careful with her shots, just as her grandmother had taught her. But she was still a child, and many of the photos showed the imperfect composition and timing that marked amateur photography. But it was a final photograph on a roll that made Detective Cross reach for her phone to call the FBI field office in Indianapolis. The image was taken from a low angle, Lucy's perspective, and showed a man in a volunteer t-shirt kneeling down to her level, his face partially visible in profile. Behind him, you could make out the livestock barns and part of the parking area. The lighting was poor and the focus wasn't perfect, but facial recognition software might be able to work with what they had. More importantly, the timestamp on the film development indicated that this photograph had been taken at approximately 8:47 p.m. on July 18, 1995. This was after the girls should have been heading back to meet their father, after the point when witnesses reported hearing children's voices near the barns. This wasn't just Lucy's last photograph. It was quite possibly the last image of Emma and Lucy Hartwell ever captured, taken in the moments before they vanished forever. The FBI's digital enhancement team worked on the photograph for weeks, using advanced computer software to sharpen details and improve contrast. Slowly, features emerged from the grainy image with increasing clarity. The man in the photo had distinctive facial features, a strong jaw, deep-set eyes, and what appeared to be a small scar on his left cheek. When an enhanced image was run through facial recognition databases, it matched the driver's license photo of David Kellner with an 89% probability. But David Kellner had disappeared along with the girls, and despite decades of searching, no trace of him had ever been found. The enhanced photograph proved that he had been with Emma and Lucy in their final moments at the fair, but it brought investigators no closer to finding out what had happened to any of them after that image was captured. Detective Cross decided to take a different approach. Instead of focusing solely on finding Kellner, she began investigating his background more thoroughly, looking for patterns in his movement and behavior that might provide clues about where he might have taken the girls. What she discovered painted a picture of a transient predator who had been operating across the Midwest for years, moving from town to town, and using his pleasant demeanor and apparent knowledge of photography to gain access to children. Records show that Kellner had been present in at least 6 other communities where children had gone missing or been assaulted over a 10-year period. He had a pattern of volunteering for community events, particularly those involving children, and using his supposed expertise in photography as an icebreaker with potential victims. The revelation that he might be connected to other missing children cases brought federal authorities fully into the investigation, but also made the search exponentially more complex. In early 2023, 28 years after Emma and Lucy Hartwell vanished from the Millbrook County Fair, Detective Cross received a call that would finally begin to provide answers to questions that had haunted the community for nearly 3 decades. A construction crew working on a highway expansion project outside of Louisville, Kentucky, had discovered human remains buried beneath an overpass that was being demolished. The location was significant because records showed that David Kellner had relatives in the Louisville area, and investigators had long suspected he might have connections to Kentucky. The remains were those of 2 children, a girl approximately 12 years old and another approximately 8 years old. Dental records, when compared to the files in the Hartwell case, provided definitive identification. Emma and Lucy Hartwell had been found at last. The discovery brought both closure and renewed grief to their family and community. After 28 years of not knowing, the terrible uncertainty was finally over, replaced by the equally terrible certainty of loss. But the discovery raised new questions even as it answered old ones. The remains showed no obvious signs of trauma, and forensic analysis suggested that the girls had been buried shortly after their disappearance. This indicated that whatever had happened to Emma and Lucy had occurred quickly, within days or weeks of them vanishing from the fair. More puzzling was the discovery of additional remains at the same location, those of an adult male, found buried separately but clearly from the same time period. Forensic analysis of the adult remains revealed a surprise that would rewrite the entire narrative of the Hartwell disappearance. The man buried near the sisters was David Kellner himself, and the evidence suggested that he had died violently, with fractures to the skull consistent with being struck with a blunt object. The timeline indicated that he had died at approximately the same time as the girls, possibly even before them. This revelation turned the case on its head. If Kellner was also a victim, then who had killed all three of them? And why had the perpetrator gone to such elaborate lengths to hide the bodies in a location nearly 200 miles from where the girls had last been seen? Detective Cross found herself investigating not just a kidnapping and double murder, but triple homicide with a suspect who remained completely unknown. The answer came from an unexpected source. Among Kellner's possessions found with his remains was a wallet containing identification cards under multiple names, confirming what investigators had long suspected about his use of false identities. But also in the wallet was a small notebook filled with handwritten entries that appeared to be a record of his criminal activities, including detailed descriptions of children he had targeted in various communities. The notebook revealed that Kellner had been working with a partner, someone identified only by the initials RM, who helped him identify and approach potential victims. The partnership had apparently been profitable, with the notebook containing references to payments received for photographs and videos of children in various compromising situations. What had started as a kidnapping case had uncovered a child exploitation ring that had been operating across multiple states for years. But the partnership between Kellner and his mysterious collaborator had apparently gone wrong sometime after the abduction of Emma and Lucy Hartwell. The notebook's final entry, dated July 22, 1995, described a meeting with RM to discuss the situation and figure out next steps. The meeting had apparently ended with Kellner's murder and the killing of the two witnesses who could have identified his partner. Using the information from Kellner's notebook, federal investigators began a nationwide search for individuals with the initials RM who had been connected to child exploitation cases in the 1990s. The search eventually led them to Robert Manning, a former carnival worker who had been arrested multiple times for various offenses involving children, but had always managed to avoid serious prison time due to lack of evidence or witness cooperation. Manning, now 67 years old and living under an assumed name in rural Montana, was arrested in a pre-dawn raid that found his property filled with evidence of decades of criminal activity. In addition to thousands of illegal photographs and videos, investigators discovered detailed records of his partnership with Kellner and several other predators who had operated similar schemes across the country. Under interrogation, Manning finally confessed the murders of Emma and Lucy Hartwell and David Kellner. He described how the partnership had begun to unravel when Kellner became increasingly paranoid and demanding, threatening to expose Manning's operation unless he received a larger share of the profits. The meeting on July 22, 1995, was supposed to have been a negotiation, but when Kellner arrived with the two girls as leverage, Manning realized that his partner had become too unstable to trust. Manning's confession revealed the final terrible truth about what had happened to Emma and Lucy Hartwell. They had been killed not by the man who had approached them at the county fair, but by his partner, who saw them as loose ends that needed to be eliminated. Their deaths had been quick, Manning claimed, though he showed no remorse of the destruction he had caused to their family and community. The arrest and confession of Robert Manning brought legal closure to the Hartwell case, but the emotional wounds would never fully heal. Tom Hartwell, now in his 70s, lived long enough to see his daughter's killer brought to justice, though he passed away just 6 months after Manning's conviction. Janet Hartwell had died years earlier, never knowing what happened to the children she had sent off to enjoy a summer evening at the county fair. The discovery of Lucy's final photograph had been the key that unlocked a case that might otherwise have remained forever cold. That grainy, imperfect image captured by an 8-year-old girl in her final moments had preserved the evidence needed to identify her killer and bring him to justice nearly 3 decades later. It was a testament to the power of hope, persistence, and the simple courage of an elderly woman who finally decided to speak up about what she had witnessed on a terrible night in July 1995. Today, the Millbrook County Fair continues to operate each summer, though it bears little resemblance to the event that existed in 1995. Security measures that would have seemed unimaginable then are now standard. Background checks for all volunteers, identification wristbands for children, and trained personnel monitoring every area of the fairgrounds. The memorial garden for Emma and Lucy has been expanded over the years, and their story serves as a reminder of the importance of vigilance and community awareness in protecting the most vulnerable among us. The case of the Hartwell sisters stands as both a tragedy and a testament to the power of persistence in seeking justice. It demonstrates how advancing technology can breathe new life into cold cases, how a single piece of evidence preserved by chance can unlock decades-old mysteries, and how the courage of witnesses who come forward even years later can make the difference between justice and perpetual uncertainty. Most importantly, it ensures that Emma and Lucy Hartwell, who vanished on what should have been a magical summer night, will never be forgotten.